Hi guys, welcome back to the Endurance podcast. Hi Tim, how you doing? Haven't seen you.
Hi Tom.
Well, what have you been up to since we last spoke?
Yeah, as you can see, I'm in a different room than usually. So I'm recording this from Slovenia. So I'm on a holiday pretty much, but my holiday is not like lying on a beach, but I enjoy cycling. I've been to Austria last week, cycling on my own, doing some crazy stuff on the bike, as I always do. And now I'm recovering at home and trying still to enjoy some of the Slovenian mountains. How about you, Tom?
Yeah, I've been up to. I've been a bit involved with the Commonwealth Games when it came to Birmingham, helping out one of the riders I coach who was in it, and just enjoying the nice atmosphere that was around with it. In the end, trying to get back on the bike a bit after being ill last time we spoke, I think. Yeah, tell us. I think you should tell the listeners a little bit more about your crazy ride you did last week, because
yeah,
it was pretty crazy.
So yeah, I always try to do something crazy when I'm on a holiday, something like really extreme. And this year I decided that I want to do a 7,000 meters of elevation gain ride. So I did just that in Austria. It's a perfect like place to do in Zelden, in Etztal region. So you have some really long climbs there. Even the highest open to public road in the European Union, the glacier, Rettenbach Glacier, which goes to up to 2,800 meters. So it's a really great place to do some extreme riding. So I did like 200k long ride with 7,000 meters of elevation gain in just like 8 hours and a half or something like this, on my own. Wanted to like try some fueling strategies, and how things go and how fatigue develops and how I feel. It was really hard, especially because of the altitude. In the end, for the last 100 meters of the road, I was pretty much walking, or basically stopping and walking and stopping and walking, because I was so kind of probably like dehydrated, and also probably glycogen depleted, because I was on my own. I didn't have any support cars or anything. So I was without the drink. And for the first 7 hours, I only drank 3 bottles, which was obviously not enough.
And how many gels did you manage to take over 7 hours and that much climbing then? I can't.
So yeah, the plan was to go with 90 grams per hour, because basically this was how much I was able to carry around. So I only had like support after when I returned to Zelden, so which was like after 7 hours before going for the glacier for the end of the ride. And after that point, I think I had carbs for 90 grams per hour with me, but I think I brought back like 3 energy unit gels worth of food. So like probably I was more like 75 grams per hour. But this was just down to not being able to consume any more gels because I was so dehydrated towards the end. And yeah, that was my mistake. I didn't refill the bottles on one of the places where I could do that, where I could have done that. But one of the things that's why I was really like trying to see how I react and perform is that I pretty much avoided fueling when I was climbing, and I really focused on fueling when I was descending or just before the descent. So idea was to provide a fuel for the descents where I can kind of replenish glycogen stores, and I think this worked really well. So I was mostly like drinking on the climbs themselves and then eating loads when I came to the top. And even like sometimes when there was opportunity to take some food on board in the middle of the descents, because the descents were really, really long. And this kind of worked really well until the very end when I was just dehydrated.
So maybe you could have done with a little bit more, but the lack of water put paid to that, really. They don't have any fountains up on the sides of the roads and stuff there.
Yeah, there was one fountain, but I didn't stop. That was a mistake because there was a queue of people waiting to get water bottles refilled. And I was like, no, I don't need this. Let's go to the top. And at that point, I had one full bottle, but to the top was still 1 hour or so because the climb was super long and it was super hot. And yeah, I simply didn't drink enough.
And it was the highest road in Europe, you reckon?
Yeah, that's what they say. So it's 2,800 meters. Apparently, it's the highest paved road in European Union. If you're not counting the Spain, close to the public.
Yeah, I think. Well, it's close to cars. Valletta is after. Maybe about 2,800, I think, as well. You can go up on a bike further, although the road is not very great at the top. But
okay.
Highest open to cars, maybe that one.
Yeah, could be. Yeah, could be that way.
Something like that. Okay, cool. So today we're going to talk about breakfast or pre-race or pre-training meals. It's going to be a little bit involved around your latest study, which was specifically around breakfast because it was following an overnight fast. So I'll let you tell us the title and you can tell us a little bit about that first of all.
I forgot the title.
That's why I said to you today. So it's addition of fructose to a carbohydrate-rich breakfast improves cycling endurance capacity in trained cyclists. We'll call it the breakfast study, I think.
Okay, yeah, let's call it that way. So a little bit of a background to start with. So during my PhD, I've paid a lot of attention to how different types of carbohydrates affect recovery, like glucose-based carbohydrates or maltodextrin or glucose only, and then as compared to like fructose or even galactose. And this particular study looked at what happens if you ingest rice with glucose. So basically, all the carbohydrates in this case are glucose sourced, no fructose, as compared to rice plus fructose. So we have a combination of different types of carbohydrates, so glucose and fructose. And we looked at what happens to endurance exercise capacity. So participants got a breakfast, which was 2 grams per kilogram of body mass, 2 hours before the start of the ride. And after that, they were exercising at the first lactate threshold for as long as they could. So this is like a moderate exercise intensity. And they were able to go for like 130 minutes on average with glucose and rice, and 137 minutes, so a 7-minute increase in exercise capacity with additional fructose, which is quite a lot if we think about how about the performance itself. And we found a statistically significant increase in endurance exercise capacity when you add fructose to the breakfast. The next question is probably why this is the case. And we know that during exercise, fructose is beneficial because it utilizes a different transport mechanism as compared to glucose. So we can get like more carbohydrates from the intestines into the bloodstream in a certain amount of time. When it comes to breakfast or post-exercise, post-exercise nutrition, fructose has additional role, which is fructose first needs to go into the liver where it's metabolized. And we know we have 2 different types of glycogen storage. So the first stores are muscle glycogen stores, which are super important for muscular work, but we also need to pay attention to liver glycogen, which basically supplies the body with glucose during exercise or throughout the day. So glucose for brain work comes from the liver. And because fructose first goes into the liver, it preferentially kind of, or to a high degree, replenishes the liver glycogen stores. On the other hand, with glucose, you do not really achieve that. So after an overnight fast, what happens is that basically overnight you haven't really done any muscle work. So muscle glycogen stores should be full if you've done your homework the previous day and like kind of filled up the stores. And the only difference in the morning would be a depletion of liver glycogen stores. So addition of fructose should, or like that what we hypothesized, should speed up the filling up the liver glycogen stores, and then this would lead to increased endurance capacity. This is probably the mechanism behind this whole study.
Okay, so that liver glycogen then is better able to maintain blood glucose levels towards the end of that your endurance capacity test, where the glycogen stores are starting to drop, and as you're fatiguing.
Yeah, exactly. So unfortunately, or like interestingly, we didn't see like a drop in blood glucose concentrations towards the end in any of the conditions. But it's kind of, this is probably pretty common when the exercise intensity is relatively high. And even though it sounds like low exercise intensity, the first threshold, it's still pretty intense. And we know that at higher intensities, basically the body makes sure there is enough glucose in the bloodstream, either through release of glycogen from the liver or by gluconeogenesis. So like creating glucose molecules from other sources like protein. And probably in this case, the body basically sensed that there was no liver glycogen left, but just to maintain the body functions, the gluconeogenesis kicked in, but sooner or later, the body decided, let's call it a day. Participants had to stop because they just couldn't do it anymore. I took part in this study myself. Obviously, it was double blinded, so nobody knew what we were getting. I had absolutely no clue. And I think I was able to ride for 15 minutes longer with rice and fructose, which is kind of significant, a lot like a big improvement in capacity.
Yeah, 15 minutes is quite a decent amount. So the mean was 7 minutes, but you had some people who didn't respond as well, and then some responded a lot better, but it was still significant, statistically significant overall. So you, as part of the study, you did a glycogen depleting session the night before. I think you described it as normalizing glycogen. It wasn't to complete depletion. So obviously the glycogen stores might not have been completely full the next morning as well. So I guess that's probably more relevant to, say, a stage race where you're racing, you've depleted your glycogen stores, and then you're trying to recover and go on the next day. If you were going into a one-day race where presumably you've rested well the day before, you've had a good amount of high carbohydrate diet, would you expect to see the same results, or would you think maybe you would need a little bit less fructose as part of the breakfast? So I think it was 2-to-1 ratio, wasn't it, of rice? Sorry, I was going to say maltodextrin then. Rice to fructose. Do you think you'd need as much fructose in that case, or could you get away with just adding a little bit of sugar to your normal breakfast there?
Yeah, I think so. So basically, we did the day before, just to explain and expand a bit further. So the day before this, like the experimental session, we did a glycogen normalizing session, which was like participants came in like 2 p.m. And did like around 2 hours of cycling in the lab, which involved doing like 4 times 8-minute long intervals. And the idea was that even though we asked them to kind of replicate the diet and the activity patterns that is leading into that trial, I think there would still be some variations in glycogen content in the muscle and in the liver. And we kind of, by doing this kind of exercise, the idea was that by the end of it, muscle glycogen concentrations would be normalized, so basically the same every single time. And this is based basically on the previous evidence that the more glycogen you have, the more you use. So if they had full glycogen stores, for instance, and they were not following our advice on the nutrition, then probably they would have used more glycogen, and then the response would have been the same for every single time. And then we gave them the food to take home, so that was standardized. We gave them rice, some protein as well, so that every single time, probably the glycogen concentrations in the muscle were very similar. The last meal was at around 9 p.m. In the evening, and then they came in the morning, very early in the morning, like 7 a.m. Mm-hmm. And I don't really expect that the glycogen store would have been topped up, but I would expect the same to happen, even if with normal full-day glycogen loading protocols. And why is that so? Because if we filled up the liver glycogen stores the day before, we would still get a kind of a depletion or a reduction in liver glycogen stores the next day. So in the morning, or 25-30%. And if we are able to kind of replenish this in the morning to a higher degree, the better it is. So yes, I would expect the same to happen every single, on every occasion.
And would you still think you still need quite a large amount of fructose to do that, or would you be able to use a bit of a lower amount?
That's a really good question, and I have absolutely no clue. The idea, the dose we decided for was, because you all know that I'm a fan of 1 to 0.8 ratio of glucose-based carbohydrates versus fructose. But in this case, we went with traditional 2-to-1 ratio. So 2 was rice-based carbohydrates, and 1 was fructose. And this was kind of in the past shown to affect liver glycogen storage over a few hours, and that was sufficient to kind of see a difference in replenishment of liver glycogen stores as opposed to just providing people with glucose only. And I don't really know whether just having some fruits, which would be relatively low in fructose, but have some fructose, or just adding some honey or some fructose sources would be enough. So I'm just speculating here. I would probably say that you need some substantial amounts of fructose, just because, you're filling up liver glycogen stores, so you need the material. You just can't have 5 grams. That's probably not enough. You need probably some more fructose, because some of the fructose will be converted to glucose, some of the fructose will be converted to lactate, and some will stay within the liver. So you probably want to have at least 30 grams probably of fructose to see any benefit. In this case, it was 2 grams per kilo, which is probably, I don't know, 120 grams in total of carbs, and then divided by 3 is 40 grams of fructose.
Yeah, that's quite a lot of bananas or honey on your breakfast, isn't it?
Yeah, that's why it's kind of difficult. Whenever you want to do this applied, and don't expect the riders or people to consume fructose on its own, it's pretty difficult to get to this ratio. So they would have to. They would need to consume large amounts of syrups, honey, some sugary juices, which are all fine, but just day after day, perhaps that's not what you really want.
Yeah. And fructose gets a bit of a bad rap, doesn't it, about sort of potentially causing insulin resistance obesity and the like. Obviously, for an athlete, that's probably not going to be a major risk. But how do you feel about how would you feel? Sorry, about that sort of reputation that fructose has gained?
Yeah, I find it really really funny when we talk about fructose and sugars and carbohydrates in general, and we talk about health. And people really say, well, yeah, sugary drinks are super bad, fructose especially. And yeah, there is some evidence actually that links fructose consumption to some diseases like obesity, type 2 diabetes, etc., etc. So it can be a problem, but we have to always think about the context. So what we do with exercise is we kind of lower or even deplete glycogen stores or the carbohydrate stores within the body. So what we do with post-exercise nutrition or pre-exercise nutrition is fill up those stores. And if you're not gaining weight, meaning that your weight is stable, which it probably is in elite or in any athletes, then you basically what you do day by day, depleting and repleting those stores. So you're not adding more energy than what you require. On the other hand, people that are consuming sugary drinks and are not active basically perhaps have full glycogen stores already, and they just add on the top of that those carbohydrates. And obviously any energy that is coming into the body that is in excess of what the body can store then causes problems. So if you have you just do 5 days of glycogen loading, 10 grams per kilogram of body mass of carbs per day, you will probably fill out the glycogen stores after 2 days. And the other 3 days, you will just be overflowing the body with carbs. So some of the carbs will definitely be kind of oxidized straight away, and some will need to be stored in a certain form that is not carbohydrates because the glycogen stores are already full. And this is when those bad things happen, and you start to kind of transform the carbohydrates into fats, and fructose, because it is metabolized within the liver, it can cause a bit of a mess there. And yeah, that is when we don't really want lots of excess sugars or any source of carbohydrates or any source of energy when we are basically, because we don't really want to be gaining weight and become obese. So it's probably not the sugars to blame on its own. It's basically energy surplus to blame in the first place. And then we have better choices between all those bad choices. So whether we overflow the system with glucose-based carbohydrates or fructose or fats, all are bad. Perhaps fructose is the worst, I don't know, but yeah, this is when those links are then formed.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, hopefully people who are listening to this podcast are probably more interested in the exercise and athletic side of things and wouldn't be in that situation. But obviously you get stuff that's extrapolated from the general news that people pick up on and might be wary of. So it's good to kind of clear that up a little bit as well. So your breakfast was 2 grams per kilo 2 hours before, I think.
Yes.
So, obviously rice and sugar isn't a typical breakfast for most people. How would you translate that into, a perfect breakfast for somebody, either day to day during the stage race maybe, or as part of a one day event that they're doing?
Yeah, it's a good question. So when I think about my breakfast, for instance, and I don't do a lot of races, I do sometimes KOM attempts and sometimes really long days in the saddle. On those really hard days, I will definitely do rice with fructose, add some milk, do a pudding or something I do out of it. So it would be something with taste, so chocolate powder, like Nesquik or something. Mm-hmm. Anything with sugar would be good. And then if you're talking about the elite athletes, they can always supplement do rice and then add some fruits on the top of it, some like I don't know, bread with jam or honey, or this kind of thing, or some syrups. Juices are really good because they're pretty much 1-to-1 ratio of glucose, fructose-based carbohydrates. If you have like 4 hours before the start of the stage, you can actually eat a lot of carbohydrates, and you can easily get those 30-40 grams of fructose. On the other hand, if you only have like an hour or less than 2 hours, that's where the problem becomes bigger, because there is simply no time to digest the food. You really have to have really simple carbohydrate sources, so that the digestion actually occurs before you start the exercise. And in this case, like even eating just Haribo in the morning would be just okay, or just eating like drinking a juice, that would also do the trick. You don't have to have like a solid breakfast if you're really limited in time. And I very often, like when I work with athletes, and even I do it myself, if I have like a very early training session, like want to hit the bike by 5:30 in the morning, sometimes I don't even have breakfast. I have the breakfast on the bike, what I call it. So I just have like some carbs in liquid form just before I go to the bike. And then I assume that those carbohydrates will be released into the bloodstream, maintain the blood glucose concentrations. And even though I started with like kind of low liver glycogen stores, that would still be enough for like 2 hours of hard cycling. And you could easily see in this study, like people were able to ride for more than 2 hours with a breakfast of 2 grams per kilogram body mass of carbs without carbohydrates during the exercise at relatively high intensity. And looking at the average power outputs for most training sessions, you will never ever go to average power of first lactate threshold. It will always be lower. So that should also almost always do the trick. So very simple carbs in the morning. This is how I like to do it. And I think like the idea that you have to have like a big breakfast is a bit like overrated, and you can't really extrapolate what professionals are doing into what you're doing, because most amateur races actually start early in the morning, especially like the sportifs or Gran Fondos, whereas professionals start at noon or 1 p.m. And there is a big difference of what the requirements are. So for professionals, I want the protein in the morning. They're racing day after day for 3 weeks, for instance, and they need a protein. Whereas if you're racing like once a month, you probably can afford not eating protein in the morning. And just focus on carbs. So it's not the same, and you can't really extrapolate between different groups.
Yeah, I guess you have to find out what works for you and take into account what's coming up. Like you say, if it's early in the morning and a relatively short ride, then you can get away with relatively little and topping up on the bike or whilst you're riding. But yeah, if you're going to be doing a 150 kilometer race, Gran Fondo or something, then you just have to kind of bite the bullet and get up even earlier so that you can get a decent amount inside you, rather than leaving it all to the last minute like that, because you want to have it nicely digested.
Yeah, and exactly.
So a 2 grams per kilo of carbs, what would that look like in terms of a typical portion size of rice on a plate or in a cereal bowl or something?
No idea. I always weigh the food and just get an idea of what this is. I think it's like usually 100 grams of cooked rice has 30 grams of carbs. So it's quite a lot when you see it, but because rice is so easily digested, in the end it's not that much. So it's really easy. Like, it was funny to see when we were preparing the rice for the glycogen repletion, the afternoon before this test in the lab. when we were like preparing the rice, and there was loads of rice, and then we gave them the rice that people like in portions to have when they get home. And the portions were big. Like you were looking at those portions and were like, well, this is a lot of carbohydrates. How are they going to consume it? And I was like, yeah, they just have to do it. And almost everyone was saying in the end, it was not enough. They would be able to eat more just because like it's so quickly digested, the rice, that you just, simply become hungry again. And obviously, based on this and also the timing, which was kind of, there was probably not enough time to completely fill up the stores. They were not like completely filled up, which is fine, as long as the stores were normalized. But basically, rice is a really good way to kind of get the carbohydrates in, low fat, low protein, just carbs, and very quickly digested.
Is there anything else you'd recommend as an alternative to rice?
Yeah. So rice needs time to cook. Like semolina, I think, is a really good way of getting the simple to digest carbs in the morning, and it's much quicker prepared. So that would be also like a really good alternative, I think.
And I remember you mentioning before about the fiber content of rice. If it's then cooled down, does that apply for this? Semolina as well? It's one of those things you've got to prepare fresh in the morning. You couldn't. Oh,
the resistant starch. I think even for the rice, there is not much. You lose probably a few percent, but not like the amount that some people claim. Otherwise, rice would be probably like cold rice would be the best weight loss food you could get, but it's definitely not. So forget about those theories.
That's good, because I like some rice for my meal the night before the race, and then I just have the leftovers in the morning, rather than cooking something extra.
Yeah, it makes sense.
One less thing to do at 6 o'clock in the morning when you're trying to force down tons of rice.
Yeah, and another thing, like why rice is pretty good is you can make it with quite some water, add some milk or so, and you also like take care of the hydration in the morning. You add a pinch of salt, and because of all the sugar, you don't feel that salt, and it's really good for hydration as well, because obviously you want to start your rides well hydrated, especially in the summer heat. So this works really well as well.
Yeah, it expands a lot, doesn't it? The grain, so there's a lot of water included within that rice as well. It's a good point as well. Yeah, great. Anything else you want to add on in terms of breakfast? Because it's pretty much the breakfast podcast, isn't it, at the moment?
Yeah.
5:30 at night, so it's the wrong time to be talking about it. But
forget about the porridge. Porridge oats. That's not a good breakfast. I don't recommend it, especially not if you're on early starter. And you go to the bike very quickly. It's okay for professionals because they start at noon, at 1 p.m., and they become hungry by then if they have breakfast at 9 or 8 a.m., but definitely don't have porridge oats when you wake up at 6 for a start of the training session at 8 or even before that. It's not going to work. It can cause gastrointestinal issues. It has too much fiber. It probably has too much fat as well, and you just avoid it if you can. I know it's an unpopular advice, but I'll just say it out loud and stand by it.
So the reason that's keeping you filled up for longer is exactly the reason you don't want it shortly before the ride. It's got a lot of fiber in it. It's still going to be
exactly
sat there in your stomach digesting and taking blood away from your muscles, whereas you want something quickly digested, like rice and fructose maybe even.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's been really good. Thanks for talking through the study, which I believe is just recently going to be out when this podcast is released. Is that right?
Yeah, hopefully it's been accepted like a month ago. So hopefully it's going to be online, and it's going to be in the notes of the podcast if it gets out by the time the podcast is released.
So we'll leave a link down below in the description of the podcast, and you can go and check out yourselves. Great.
Yeah.
Thanks for that, Tim. Educational as ever, and we'll speak to you soon for the next one.
Yeah, thanks for hosting me, and yeah, see you in a month's time.
Yeah, see you soon.